75% of men give in to their anxiety and never approach women they're interested in, as reported in a study by the dating app Happen. Much of that's because men have no idea how to start and lead a conversation with a girl and are afraid of being stuck in embarrassing silence. If that sounds like you, listen on as we topple your fears and arm you with a myriad of different openers and conversation starters that work like a charm on any girl. By the end of this video, you'll be more confident in your approach and be able to effortlessly flow into a conversation with the girl you like. Approaching a girl and opening a conversation with her are often two separate challenges for men. The former requires initial courage to walk up to her, while the latter needs you to have wit, creativity, humor, and communication skills to get her interested. Let's say you spot a girl in the distance out with her friends, and catch her in a moment of solitude where you think the time's right to walk up and introduce yourself. This is the initial approach and constitutes the first part of where most men struggle, but the approach is often over quickly after a brief split of courage. It's now that you find yourself in close proximity to the girl, thinking about what to say next. This is the most nerve-wracking scenario guys conjure up in their head, which often prevents them from making the approach in the first place. What you need is an effective opener that can branch off into a longer and more interesting conversation. An opener can make or break the energy for the rest of what you say. Depending on the type of opener you use, it also determines the direction of your ensuing conversation, which is hard for guys with a weak frame to control once the tone of the interaction's been set. Now keep this in mind and heed the advice that follows if you want to break free of this frustrating predicament. Overcoming approach anxiety starts from control over your mind. The first step toward doing that is not letting yourself get consumed by your own thoughts and imploding within yourself. Getting caught up in imagined worst-case scenarios is a surefire way to shoot yourself in the foot. Instead, snap your fingers to interrupt that chain of thought and take a deep breath. Employ what's called the 3-second rule to gain a moment of triumph over your anxiety. It's a technique where you limit the amount of time you give yourself for the approach to 3 seconds, and force yourself to walk toward the girl no matter what after the brief hiatus. They say the fastest way to learn how to swim is to take a plunge in the water. The desperation to survive will force your body to kick around to keep itself afloat. This is mirrored in how dating and pickup work. There are some things that must be practiced and experienced, instead of simply being explicated or theorized. Once you're past the small talk and introduction, you'll realize you need the conversation to go on a tangent and continue for longer. But that's only possible when you've used an effective opener. Openers can be direct or indirect, and both have their place and purpose in cold approach. A direct opener is one where you state upfront your intention of the conversation. Here's an example of a direct opener. Hey, you caught my eye from afar and you're really pretty, so I just had to come and introduce myself. This direct opener leaves no room for her to suspect anything else. You made it clear that you're romantically interested and would like to take the conversation forward. The best thing about a direct opener is that it leaves no room for ambiguity and leaves the onus on the woman to respond. This approach does not beat around the bush and get straight to the point. But that also means it's a lot harder for guys to pull off. Unlike an indirect approach, which will be discussed later, the direct opener does not give you a chance to test the water or see how she reacts to your presence before blurting out your attraction. This is why it can sometimes lead to abrupt rejections. It also requires a degree of courage that not many men can muster. It's forged after repeated encounters, after which rejection becomes a mere signal to move on to the next girl. But if done right, it can also be the most rewarding start to your interaction with the girl. This is because every second the conversation goes on after you've displayed your interest, you're being reciprocated by the mere fact that she continues to speak with you. There are certainly ways to be more subtle in your conversation starter instead of leading with a statement of your interest. This is where you need to improvise and be creative. Look around the situation and see if there's something you can lead with. This kind of observational opener can be peppered with well-placed humor and could set the tone for a lighthearted conversation with the girl. Starting from her dress, the way she stands, or just the ambiance of her surrounding, you'll find ample ideas for observational humor, which will let you slide right into a conversation with a woman you thought you were too nervous to approach. But if nerves are a big hurdle for you to overcome, there's an even more nuanced way to open a conversation that circumvents all that initial jitter of anxiety. It's called the indirect opener, and it really is as simple as it sounds. Let's say you're walking back to class on your college campus and spot a girl you like in the hallway. An indirect opener would be something like this. Hey, do you know when the play at the auditorium's happening? Asking for help or direction's a great way to slide into a conversation. After she answers your question, simply thank her and introduce yourself. It's a way that comes across as genuine and brings out the politeness in her. This approach seems as natural and spontaneous as possible, and does not make your intent or interest clear. It saves you the anxiety of spilling your feelings right off the bat, and does not put her on the spot or having to reject you right away. The indirect approach also allows you to think ahead of the conversation, and be able to better navigate its nuances in your head before you say it. Pickup artists have often taught of what's called the canned opener, and it can work wonders if used with tact and judgment. Here's the problem with impromptu sliding into a conversation with a girl not knowing what to expect. Most likely in your nervousness, you will lose the charm and charisma you had built up, and will instead become a jittery, incoherent mess that turns her off. Having a canned opener means knowing beforehand what her responses are likely to be, and already having a follow-up at the back of your mind. This gives you the advantage of not having to think on the spot about what to say next, and coming off as more in control of the conversation than you would otherwise be. It's said that true confidence comes from competence. It comes from knowing what your next step is and the trust in yourself that you can do it. This is exactly what a canned opener does, as it lays out the expected runway for you before the conversation can take off. Approaching a girl and opening a conversation are two of the most daunting walls that separate men from courting the girl they like, and knocking down both of them is indispensable to get to the talking stage. Breaking the ice with a girl and building initial rapport is a boundary most men rarely cross, as they let potential lifelong love stories pass them by out of anxiety, self-consciousness, or plain cowardice. It's a skill that's forged after abrasive rejections and failed cold approaches, but it's also the boundary that separates you from success. After you've gone through the approach and conversation a few times, it'll become clear that the demon you thought you couldn't face starts to shrink into nothingness the moment you step up to it. Most women will carry on the conversation if they're interested, or politely excuse themselves if they're not, and forget about the encounter 3 minutes later. So whether it's a direct opener where you put your attraction for her up front, or an indirect opener where you lead with something trivial, getting into a conversation with a woman is the first step to courting her. If that sounds interesting, like the video and hit the subscribe button to never miss another timely update. The content you find here will put you ahead of the curve. See you in the next video.